Good morning. Excuse me, I'm a little injured today. This happens when you are in your 40s and play like you're 10 outside. A little bit of an audible. That sermon, the bio is still correct. I'm still all of those wonderful and probably a little annoying things. But I actually will be. That was the sermon that I did last time I was here. What was it? Actually around this time last year, I think. Yeah. But this time, I am going to be talking about some current events. Just to let you know, I talked to your servant leader beforehand to get their permission. And so, if you're mad at me, it's their fault. I made sure they said that I could say the things that I ran them past them, and they were like, you know what, go ahead, they can do that. So please make sure that all complaints are left on their desk Monday morning. And so what we're going to talk about today is the theme of this, that I do not want these neighbors. I do not want these neighbors. Now, if you will excuse me, I'm going to read the text that I'll be coming from dealing with this. It's going to be from Luke chapter 10, verse 25 through 37. Even though my beliefs shifted, I'm still very much a preacher boy somewhere in there. Amen. All right, so if you allow me, I'll just read this to ground us, and then we will get into our conversation for today. So again, Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who exactly is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. The priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he met the man, he passed on the other side of him. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. And he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell in the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." So, I don't know if you've been busy or not, but it's been a rather interesting month or so, one would say, in the United States of America. I know there was an election or something like that I heard took place that, didn't really go away, that many people were hoping that it did. And if there was a way to somehow be, what's the phrase? We're back at square one. Is that the phrase? If there was a way to be back at square zero, I think this is it, somehow. But what's interesting for me, and particularly in my line of work, working in communications and doing a lot of work around progressive messaging and getting certain ideas out into the public and helping them to take root, that a lot of people felt angry. It wasn't shock. I remember when he won in 2016, and being around DC, it was like everybody knew the same person who died. Everything was quiet, nothing, everything, but it wasn't anger. It was just kind of like, how could this happen? But now it's like anger and rage. And I'm sure it's in no small part because of, the wonderful exit polls that showed that, that our incoming president actually got more people to support him this time than last time. Although I will note, as somebody with numbers, this may be a little pleasure, but fewer people voted overall. So even though he got most of the vote, it was a smaller election altogether, which means that more people opted out. So that's probably a small comfort because he still won, but it's not as if, it was the same as 2020 and then that. But he did get more people, the more support. And what people in various groups did, and what I noticed too, is that they were mad. People started, distancing themselves. I'm not talking to these people. I'm not talking to them because how dare them not vote this way? How dare they not do the things that I would have done? And treating poll numbers as if they're actually people, to the point where, I'm going to make a blue bracelet so that way I'm safe. Because, I don't know about you, but if I'm scared, a blue bracelet really makes me feel secure. But everybody of all different demographics and groups, Black women saying, hey, we're on sabbatical, we're not doing anything. And even a lot of Democratic leaders saying, well, we were too woke. We should have been more mainline to do this. We knew we were too nice to trans people. And I kept looking for the time that happened. Maybe someone can point me to that time when it happened. I don't remember when it happened. But people just began to become more insulated and just angry. And again, even turning on one another. And I don't mean the folks over there, the supporters. I mean, in the folks who are in our own little motley crew, turning on one another. Like I just said, you had even our own Democratic politicians saying, well, we cater too much to these groups and to that group and this group over here and to that pet thing. We need to not do that. That's why we lost. Or continuing to adopt even some of the frames that they take. That there's too much diversity. There's too much of it. There's just too much, That even having, a woman who is Black and South Asian, there's just too much diversity. We shouldn't have did that. Yeah, that was a mistake too. That we should find ways. It's too much. People aren't ready for all this diversity. That we go too far. We need to cater to Middle America because Middle America is, there's apparently no diversity there either. But also, not a peep from so many people since the election. I don't know about you. Maybe this is just me. But if you tell me that if someone, I play video games, right? And usually it's some type of thing where if we don't stop the bad guy, they're going to ruin the world, right? And so what you do, well, actually, no, you all are better than me. What I do is sit there and push buttons forever until I save the world, because if Link doesn't win, who will, right? If Mario doesn't win, who will? And so that means I have to help. But to be told that someone is such a unique, distinct, existential threat and then lose to this threat and disappear, doesn't really inspire hope in many people, does it? Doesn't really make people feel like they have a fighting chance overall. And so what do we do here? What's the situation? We're in this situation here where the institutions and worlds are crumbling around us, and we are pointing the fingers at other people who we thought were on our team, concerned about what all of our lives will look like, while still trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. I mean, some people just call that Monday, but, you know. So what does this even matter? What does this have to do with anything I just said about that text? Let's just first get into some of the context. If you've been in Christian spaces before, you've heard that passage time and time again. And you probably heard the same interpretation, is that basically there's this person, a lawyer, and he's trying to trap Jesus in this, mental riddle and trying to get him to say, well, what's the law? Who's my neighbor? And then Jesus flips it on his head and says, well, the neighbor is the person who actually did the thing they were supposed to do, not the people, because he knew that, you all don't like Samaritans for this reason, that reason. And the funny thing is, I think it never says that Jesus doesn't agree with those reasons. I think that's kind of funny. If I use as my mentor used to say, my preaching imagination, it wouldn't be funny if Jesus felt the same thing about Samaritans that the people he was talking to did, and he still said this? Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be more realistic to how many of us are, right? But he says to him that this person, the one who actually helped him, is the neighbor, not the priest, not the lawyer, not the Levite, but it's the person that did what needed to be done, went beyond the pale. Now, I will tell you this, as someone who goes to conferences, academic and otherwise, it would be great if it wrapped up like the way it did in that passage, right? It's like, oh, well, after you said all that, my, question is now answered and I'm done and don't need to talk any further, right? That's how somebody kind of made that pretty at the end, because no debate ever ends that nicely. But ultimately, what he's saying here is that this person is your neighbor, not these other two people who are from you, who are part of your group. And so this is the problem. I think sometimes when we think about who our neighbors are, we automatically think about people who we like. You know what I mean? Like, our neighbor is the person who is right next door to me, who I like. It's Susan with the 2 kids and the dog, and they play with my 3 kids and the cat, and she makes Christmas cookies. And when it's Easter, I do an Easter egg hunt at my house. She's my neighbor, not the person across the street directly from me who doesn't mow their lawn, who, sits out on the porch, doesn't really say much to anybody. They're not my neighbor. And certainly not 2 houses over with the Trump sign up. They cannot be my neighbor. They don't even exist. I don't even know how they're alive, right? So they are not my neighbor. But no, the person who lives 3 exits down 495, they're my neighbor, because it's only like a 20-minute drive away. Because I like them, and they pick up my kids from soccer sometimes, and we'd have hobbies together. But the person who sits next to me on the bus that I see when I go to work every day, they're not my neighbor because they smell funny. I don't know why they smell funny, but they do, and they aggravate me. So even though I see them every day on the bus, and sometimes I see them more than my own family members, they don't count. They're not my neighbor. I don't want these neighbors. I want to pick the neighbors that I want, because that'll help me. It's about me. I want to pick neighbors. That's what I want. That's essentially what the passage here, in my view, is trying to communicate. like I said, the typical translation and interpretation of it is, these people who are socially looked at as outcasts and wrong and practicing the wrong religion and have, a bootleg temple, and they're just, they're, they are the, to them, it's like, the Israel is, is Fruit Loops and Samaria, well, they're just, fruity circles. You know what I mean? They're the off-brand. They're not the real. They're generic. It's like you wanted Frosted Flakes or sugar-coated cornflakes of cereal. That's what they are. They're not real like us, type of thing. But another way that I see this, and I think with the work that I do and what has all happened recently, what it really shows me is that it doesn't mean that our neighbors can't be people who we like and enjoy. Like, that doesn't have to go away itself. But neighbors really, truly are people whose fates, lives, and destinies are intertwined with our own. I'll say that again, that our neighbors aren't just the people that we like. They are the people whose fates, lives, and destinies are intertwined with our own. That sounds real cosmic and very Star Wars, right? But I mean it on a different level, too. One thing I found very unique in looking at that passage again was that the two people who walked past, even though they were, Jewish, these were people of higher class, right? It was a Levite and a lawyer, someone deals with the law. These weren't everyday folks. These are the folks who were, up on Capitol Hill, the folks who are walking through Farragut Square with their briefcase, hoping to make it to their meeting on time to meet with the congressperson or whatever else in one of the fancy buildings on D Street or something like that, right? But the truth is, for the majority of people who would have been listening to this, they had far more in common with who? The Samaritan than the priest or the lawyer. And that's why it's important, because our lives are bound together. Think about something happens. What if something happens to our water? We all drink the same water. Doesn't matter where you are. We're neighbors. The things that happen to one of us impact all of us. And while it's okay to be scared and even angry, and even to acknowledge, I really don't want these neighbors. They're weird. They do things that I don't like. They do things that I don't understand. They're loud. They're unseemly to me, maybe even unkempt to me. But the truth is, we're far closer to them in our fates than we are to the people who we may aspire to be. And let's bring it down home a little bit closer. That, we have more in common with the trans person than with Trump. All of us. And even with any advantages that we might have, that our fate is closer to the unhoused people in the tents that Mayor Bowser bulldozed away, or to the black woman who you think has an attitude, or to the disabled person whose need for an accommodation on the bus made you late to work. We're all far closer in our fates than we are to anyone else. Most of us are 1, 2, if not 3 paychecks away from needing a tent outside for ourselves. And that is really why we have to focus on we are neighbors. Our neighbors are people that we may not even like. Our neighbor might even be a Trump supporter, which, sorry, that's disappointing. But one thing that my work has noticed and helped me to realize is that a lot of people, particularly this time, made that choice out of fear. and lack of different options in their mind doesn't necessarily make it the best choice, but that there is something human there that has to be seen, a need gone unmet. Very much like that person that was on the ground that everybody was walking past. And people usually like to translate it as, oh, well, the reason why the priest didn't touch him is because he was beaten up and he was bloody and he didn't want to get, he didn't want to be ritually unclean, which is fine. But here is something to consider about that. Might it be that while, yes, it's true that that could have had something to do with it, and the lawyer could have had something where to be on time, but that it is a commitment to a very, very weak, boneless, even sense of civility that keeps us from actually reaching down and picking people up, that prevents us from seeing everybody as your neighbor, for seeing the people whose lives and fates are intertwined with yours as neighbors. And again, it doesn't mean that you're best friends. It doesn't mean that you know each other's deepest, darkest secrets. But I do know one thing. If a house blows up across the street over there, guess what we suddenly all are? What? Neighbors. What happens if suddenly, because they roll back vaccines and there's a measles outbreak everywhere, and even though, I don't know, if you all took your names off, I wouldn't know them anymore off your names tags. But if one person gets it, what does that make us all suddenly? Neighbors, right? The food supply goes bad. Eggs, are eggs still really expensive? Just things like that, the little things that we think, and we can look and see, like, come on, let's just be honest here. We're on 16th Street. Okay. We all have different levels of income, of access, degrees, education, all of that. But none of that would matter in a blink of an eye. And there are a select few who are far removed from everybody in this room and far removed from everybody that we know that are making life a mess for all of us. All of us are going to get old one day. All of us can get injured. All of us need something at some point, at some time, that we cannot get on our own. And the only way we will get it is if we remain connected to one another. So my encouragement is to not isolate. I'm not saying not to be angry. I'm not saying not to be annoyed. But what I'm saying is to ground yourself even deeper in a sense that we are all neighbors. And that the people who are working very adamantly on the other end, who may want to advance that, acknowledge that, but also recognize that that tendency is all in every one of us too. Because I also get annoyed. For example, self-checkout. Right? And first I'll say, it's the good part where it's like, I'm basically saying, why do we have self-checkout? This could be more jobs for people. Why are they making me do the work here of this? They could have somebody else here and pay them to do it. But then there's someone who has trouble with computers. And all of a sudden, I become Ronald Reagan. And I'm just like, why won't you hurry up? Why are you taking so long to press all these buttons? Hurry up, let's go move. Why are you here? I hate this place, but guess what? That's my neighbor. And we're in the same self-checkout line. But because I can move through faster and because I don't have to swipe my Snap card to get my grapes, I may lose sight of that. But guess what? If something happens to that grocery store, what happens to both of us? What does that make us? Yes, hungry. But also neighbors. But I want to suggest that the priest and the lawyer were so committed to this very tepid sense of civility that they would even embrace seeing great harm done in order to keep it intact. It's almost like being in a situation where you are so desperate to maintain civility that you will embrace warmongers and bigots for their endorsements rather than actually advocate to change something. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anyone. But here is the thing. All of us can get caught up in that sense of civility. It's just how our society likes to work. It's not just them, and it's not just you, it's me too. I get annoyed when someone gets on my bus and makes the ramp pop out because I have a tennis match to be at, or I have somewhere else to be that is more important than having to wait for this thing to pop out that the driver barely knows how to use, right? But guess what? That person is my neighbor, and they have somewhere to get to as well. And they pay into the same pot that I do to be able to use that bus. These people are our neighbors, even the ones who vote the way we don't like, who don't think the way that we do, who have, at least in my experience, often very valid fears, but lack the skills and capacity and resources to reason through them, which means that they're easy to take advantage of. Doesn't excuse what they do. You don't have to be a nuclear physicist to understand that, racism, bad. However, I think it can be so easy for folks in our position to forget just how not usual some of those things are. Again, most people in the United States do not have even a college degree. So even in the midst of all of this anger and fear, and yes, there are going to be bad things that happen, I believe that our work in this moment is to really acknowledge that, while I don't want these neighbors, they are my neighbors. It's not about picking them. I can still go to Susan's house and have Christmas cookies, and her kids will still come to my house and have the Easter egg hunt. They can still do that. But the reality is, we're all neighbors. The only thing that will defeat the Leviathan on the other end that's coming for all of us is to realize that it is all of us. We are the ones, if we figure out a way to be together and move together toward a world that's better for everybody, even if it starts at your own block, that is how we push this thing back. We don't push it back by saying, oh, you're on the ground, well, you shouldn't have voted for him, bye. Or, I'm on my way to a meeting, you're a little bloody on the ground, and, I have to go meet up with, this thing over here, sorry. That's not how we do it. We do it by getting down and realizing that, okay, I don't care if I'm in my, best tuxedo, my gym clothes, or a potato sack. That the only way we get out of here is together. And also, let me mention this, what also makes them all neighbors, even, and this might sound slightly contradictory, but just follow me here. And if it is, okay, take a point away in the exam. The Levite and the lawyer do not think that they're neighbors, not only with the person on the ground, which very likely could have been a fellow Israelite, right? The truth is, the man on the ground, the priest, the lawyer, and the Samaritan are all neighbors. And you want to know why? Because whatever put that man on the street and knocked him out and made him bloody to the point of needing help is out there, and it can get any one of the four people I just mentioned. And so while they're arguing and walking past and seeing who's really the neighbor, there's something else out there that no one else is paying attention to that can very well put them in that same situation. You see how their lives are all linked together? Whether they like anyone or not, they're all walking down the same road with the same bandits. And that's what used to happen. People would kind of wait along the road. So if you were traveling from town to town, they would know certain spots. They would come out, rob people, and keep it moving. Everybody was on that road. I don't know about you. I don't have my own personal highway to drive on. I don't have my own personal bus. I wish I did. We are on the same roads, in the same grocery stores, in the same metro, on the same block, on the same water supply, on the same insurance, on the same planet. Need I go on? We're neighbors. And even though I may not want them, they may not be the neighbors I would pick, it doesn't mean we're not neighbors. We're neighbors by circumstance. And the more we hold on to that and really embrace that and say, listen, the person who is unhoused on the street I am unhoused as well, because if they can be here, I can be here right next to them too. The same situation is available. The same pitfall is for both of us. They just happen to fall first. That if we can do that, if we can hold on to that and further embrace that, then I know we can win. I know we can come out of this moment, but we're going to have to do that part. We have to rely on one another and remember that we are all each other's neighbors. Thank you.